Okay, so we are now live. I'm just letting the attendees come into the room. We do have quite a few of you with us today, so do just bear with us while we let that number settle. We had over 100 of you. Okay, so that number seems to be settling. Robin, if you want to start.
Thank you very much, Alicia, and good morning, and thank you to everyone who is joining us. It's great to have you with us. This seminar is part of the programme for the ABTT Theatre Show online and is, of course, presented by the Association of British Theatre Technicians. My name is Robin Townley and I am the ABTT's Chief Executive. Now, normally at this time of year, we would be welcoming hundreds, indeed thousands of colleagues to Alexandra Palace for the annual ABTT Theatre Show, designed very much as an opportunity for both exhibitors and visitors to get together and reforge those essential introductions, connections, and friendships. Unfortunately, for the second year, we are unable to present an actual event in June, but we are extremely excited to be co-locating the theatre show with Plaza Show at Olympia from Sunday the 5th to Tuesday the 7th of September later in the autumn. There will be an ABTT hub within the show floor with the same conversational ambience that we are all used to at Ali Pali. We are very pleased to be collaborating with Plaza in offering our industry the place for some real face-to-face conversation. Visitors may register their interest and we'll put the link for that in the chat. And I encourage anyone who's interested in exhibiting to get in touch with us at the ABTT office. For now, we are very pleased to be able to present a wide range of seminars across the 2 days of what would have been the theatre show, and indeed extending into a third day later in the week on Friday. Today, I have the great pleasure of introducing our panelists for the first session, which is Sustainable Productions and the Theatre Green Book, Volume 1. But before I do so, some quick reminders about the arrangements this morning. As with other Zoom webinars, we recommend selecting gallery view so that you can see all the panelists at the same time. The button for this can be found in the top right corner of your screen. Although there are not live closed caption subtitles this morning, this webinar will be recorded and posted on the ABTT website, where subtitles will be available by clicking the CC button in the YouTube viewer. During the webinar, please feel free to use the chat function to talk amongst yourselves. This button can be found on the bar at the bottom of your screen. Alicia, the ABTT coordinator, with whom many of you will have communicated, will be looking after this today, and she will say hello to you all in the chat now. You may like to let us know where you're joining us from today, and please do share your thoughts throughout the event. We're always pleased to hear from you. Alicia will also use the chat to post useful links and information throughout the webinar. When the screen share function is used, the screen will reorganize itself to display the shared material, and it will return to the previous screen when the sharing stops. You don't need to do anything. Most importantly, we are very keen to address your questions this morning. At any time during the webinar, please do post questions, thoughts or comments that you would like our panelists to discuss using the Q&A tab, which may also be found in the bar at the bottom of your screen. We shall try to discuss as many questions and comments as possible, so do post them as soon as you can. As mentioned, the webinar will be recorded and the recording will be available on the ABTT website, along with all relevant information after the event. So now, with great pleasure, let me introduce our panelists, and I'm hoping that they might wave when I mention their names. So to start with, Paddy Dillon, theatre architect. Paddy is an award-winning theatre architect. He is Deputy Chair of the UK's Theatres Trust and chairs the ABTT's International Theatre Engineering and Architecture Conference. In May 2020, he began the Theatre Green Book, an initiative to help UK theatres move towards sustainability, which has been spearheaded by the Theatres Trust, the ABTT and Buro Happold, with the widest ongoing support and collaboration of organisations across our industry. The first volume, Sustainable Productions, is now in use, and remaining volumes, Sustainable Buildings and Sustainable Operations, will be published later this year. Andrew Wylie, thank you, Andrew, is a partner at Buro Happold. Andrew is a member of the UK board and has 20 years experience in leading multidisciplinary projects, both within the UK and internationally. He specialises in complex new build and refurbishment projects with a particular focus in the cultural sector. A chartered engineer, Andrew's early projects for Buro Happold include the Royal Shakespeare Theatre, in which he designed the 1,030-seat auditorium containing a thrust stage, the first of its kind in the world. He was also instrumental in designing and delivering the Marlow Theatre in Kent and the Factory in Manchester. Thank you very much to both of you for joining the panel this morning, and let's get started. Sustainable Productions and the Theatre Green Book, Volume 1.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Robin, and thanks to all of you for coming along this morning. Some of you may have heard us talking about the Theatre Green Book before, so some slight apologies to you, but we're going to this morning talk through a bit about the background to it, and then Andrew and I wanted just quickly to page turn through some aspects of it, but also to leave some time at the end for your thoughts, your questions, your challenges, your ideas and suggestions as well. But just going back to how we got this initiative going and what we're trying to achieve with it. And of course, sustainability in theatre is nothing new. Many of you will have been looking for ways to work sustainably for a long time. You'll all be very familiar with Julie's Bicycle, with Creative Carbon Scotland and the other organisations, EcoStage and so on, who've been pushing it forward. But what we found when we started having conversations with theatre makers now before COVID, so more than a year ago, was a general sense of frustration at how hard it was to create change in the sector. And I think looking back now, and we've been working on this probably for 6 months now, I haven't yet had a hard conversation with anybody. Everybody in theatre who we've spoken to has been really keen to create change towards sustainability. You all know, everybody on this call knows the severity of the climate emergency that we face. And yet there was a sense of frustration that actually in trying to make shows more sustainably, it was very, very hard to make progress. Production managers, designers would say, yes, I'm passionate about this. I've been working on it and researching on it for years, and yet once you're in a show, you're working with other team members who you might not know, who might not be so committed. You're working above all with structures, with ways of putting a show together that are very much entrenched and make it very hard to reach sustainable outcomes. As an example, I often use a designer coming in may want to design something sustainably, but has no control at all over where the materials come from that go into the set that they've designed, and so on. Numerous examples of that sort. And so I think the first thing we realized, and this was in sort of Zoom calls when we were all starting to learn how to get to grips with Zoom back last kind of June and July, was that we weren't looking at any one person changing what they do. Nobody, producer, director, set maker, production manager, can own sustainability by themselves. We realized that it was about changing the whole system, moving everybody forwards in a combined way to create a more sustainable outcome. And I think it was at that point that we realized that if we were going to produce guidance and standards that were helpful to the sector as a whole, we needed to put together theatre makers of all kinds, bringing all the expertise that you bring from your separate disciplines with sustainability experts. And that was when Andrew and I started talking, because Buro Happold really are leaders in this field, and started working out how to bring together groups of theatre makers to filter it through their sustainability expertise to arrive at guidance. And I'm going to pass over to Andrew to talk a little bit about that process that we all went through.
Thank you, Paddy. I think that's a really important point there, is that in Buro Happold, joining the team and being passionate about having an impact through all of the work that we do. We're not theatre makers. We do, and I have had the privilege of designing buildings that that you work in. But we're used to and familiar with a creative design process, but not familiar with the work and not part of that theatre making process. So that gave us the opportunity to help curate the groups that we helped us create this volume and this volume of the Green Book. It also allowed us to ask those dumb questions of theatre makers and really challenge those current received wisdoms and norms. So ultimately, our role in doing this was really one of curating and organising, and then helping identify priorities with our understanding of issues that what has the greatest level of impact, and how collectively we can and you as theatre makers can set off on a new path, and recognising that this is a case of prioritising, but also an incremental shift in behaviours and processes. So what we've done is helped you structure your own set of guidance and supply you with tools that can help you along that route. Paddy,
I think you're on mute.
Oh, thanks very much. I could have gone on forever. One of the things that we all realised quite early on was that it was really essential with the Theatre Green Book that we come up with guidance that everybody uses, that we reach critical mass in its uptake by the industry. There is plenty of work that's already been done on this. Many of the theatres in Manchester, the National Theatre of Scotland, the Arcola, the Royal Court, some of the other London Theatre Consortium theatres. There are plenty of you at all sectors who have been passionate about this. A lot of small-scale companies, not building-based companies, have been doing this for a long, long time, and have written their own guidance, a lot of which is terrific. The first thing we did was look out across the sector to what's there and look at it. But one of the things we were really conscious of is that if every theatre and every company has its own guidance, based perhaps on a different methodology with different priorities, then it's really hard for the sector as a whole to move forwards, because as we all know, as the COVID crisis has underlined, theatre is made by freelancers. And a freelance designer dropping into a show in Aberdeen, working with people they might never have met before, never perhaps having worked at that venue before, having to start from scratch in learning what their priorities are, and then moving to do their next show in Plymouth. And it's a different book, it's a different set of priorities, it's a different methodology, and again, a team who they have no idea what their experience is. You can see straight away how hard it is to move forwards on sustainability. Every show becomes a struggle. And the analogy that I think came out in very early conversations is with the Theatre Yellow Book of technical standards for places of entertainment. Imagine if every theatre had its own health and safety guidance based on different principles. It would be a nightmare for theatre makers. You would all be thinking and talking about nothing but health and safety, because everybody would be struggling to learn rules that they might not know. Whereas as it is, what there is one book that everybody uses and everybody knows. Everybody knows that the people around them have worked with it before. You don't need to talk about it so much because it's sublimated into everyone's process. That's what we knew that we need to achieve with the Theatre Green Book. That's why we called it the Theatre Green Book. And it's been spearheaded by the ABTT and the Theatres Trust, the organisations that also spearhead the Theatre Yellow Book. In order to achieve critical mass, then, something that everybody could use, that straight away implied two things. Firstly, we're not about reinventing the wheel. We know there's great guidance out there. We know there are some brilliant people out there, Julie's Bicycle, Creative Carbon Scotland, and overseas, the Broadway Green Alliance and others. And the first thing that Andrew and his team did was just do a real review of all the literature, all the methodologies out there, in order to bring them together in one place. I think the second thing is that we knew from the outset that this has to be guidance that everyone could use. In other words, that although part of it needed to be a blueprint for making a genuinely sustainable show, a really advanced show that's taking us to zero carbon, we also needed to provide a first step on the ladder for those companies and parts of the sector who can't change how they work overnight, who are doing big and complex shows and need to learn how to work sustainably. And so Andrew and his team came up with the idea of making 3 tiers of guidance: advanced, which would take us a long way to sustainability; baseline as a first step, which is achievable, which is meaningful. There's no point just making change which is using recycled coffee cups. You know, that's great, but it's not going to move theatre towards sustainability. So meaningful but achievable change, and then in between the two, an intermediate level. And with that, we really hope we've come up with guidance that all of you who are on this call today could start using tomorrow. And many theatres are starting to sign up with that, because the process we've been through has been one of fantastic momentum. Once Andrew and his team had created a first draft and we put it out to the people we've been talking to, probably 50, 100 theatre makers. And what we got back was just a deluge of ideas and comments and support, but also really constructive criticism. And we were getting emails from people who we hadn't initially contacted because it was being passed around within the sector. We were getting emails from lighting designers with suggestions about how we could strengthen the lighting guidance. We were getting emails from wardrobe and costume departments who thought that the guidance could be made stronger and who'd been working on this for years and wanted to share their expertise. It was a really fantastic and exhilarating time of bringing in all that guidance and adding it to the Green Book and using it to strengthen the Green Book. That took us then to the version that Andrew and I are about to take you through, which we're calling a beta version. It's a trialing version. We know it's not perfect. It doesn't matter that it's not perfect, because we also know that if you can start trialing it and making shows with it and feeding back honestly, because nobody here is in a blame game, feeding back honestly what you learn, then we can continue to strengthen it and to add to it. And that's the process we're in. We've got a fantastic number of theatres who've already signed up to trial. Some of you will have picked up on Friday that the National Theatre has announced that all of their shows in the next 12 months are going to be made to Green Book baseline standard. National Theatre Wales, National Theatre of Scotland have committed to making all of their shows to Green Book standards, sitting within the context of some fantastic work they're already doing for sustainability. And numerous other theatres are already pledging to work with the Theatre Green Book. Many others won't want to make public announcements, and that's fine too. This is a learning curve for all of us. If everybody has to do 2 or 3 shows before they're consistently reaching the standards, that's a really great achievement. This is all about getting the whole sector moving forwards, taking the first steps, beginning the path towards genuine circular and sustainable working. So on that, I'm going to hope that this works.
While you're getting that up, Paddy, something I failed to mention really was the collaboration process and the consultation process that we started this process through. We tried to make as diverse as possible so that we had the maximum number of voices coming into this, with organisations represented of different scales and of everybody who is involved in the making process and commissioning and making process. So that was really important to make sure that there was as full of representation as possible. But as you say, this is still live. This is still we're still learning through this. And if there are voices that have not been represented in this, and there are the things missing, we need to hear that, and we need to take on board those comments.
And it wasn't. I mean, it was an absolute. And we're talking about sort of November and December last year.
Yeah.
And it wasn't it, a really just brilliant process of getting, day after day, week after week, groups of set builders, groups of directors, groups of producers, from small scale emerging practitioners, really established names, from the commercial sector, from the subsidised sector. It was a real privilege just to get a snapshot of UK theatre on our Zoom screens day after day. And yet, when Andrew, when you're talking about wanting people to come on board, we had quite recently the Association of Stage Managers got in touch saying, there's nothing in the Green Book about us, why not? And they're absolutely right. We haven't got anything there at the moment. And I hope they're at the moment coming up with some ideas that we can start to incorporate in the Green Book. Wigs, hair and makeup, similarly, got in touch to say, yes, you've got some guidance, but we really think we can help strengthen it. The Association of Sound Designers are coming up with some guidance, I hope this week or next week, that we'll incorporate in the next version. So it really is a live document, and we do need all of you to help us make it the tool that you need to take theatre forward. So I hope you can all now see the screen. You'll see at the front it's Volume 1, Sustainable Productions. There's 2 more to come. Volume 2, Sustainable Buildings, which Andrew and his team are working on now, will be about how to improve theatre buildings to make them more sustainable. That should be ready, we hope, in sort of 4 to 6 weeks. And we're going to go straight on after that to Sustainable Operations, which is looking at everything else theatres do, the front of house, the catering, the transport, the offices, the rehearsal rooms, and so on. Everything should be ready by the autumn, and that will then, in 3 volumes, give theatre makers, we hope, really holistic guidance about how to move towards sustainability. And all of it, I'd really want to stress, will sit within, is compatible with the context of tools like Julie's Bicycle, Creative Green, and we hope with all of the individual initiatives that many of you will be doing already. You'll also see at the bottom of the front cover that it's version beta for trialling. In the autumn, once we've got enough feedback from enough shows, we'll be able to call it a final version. But we really need trial shows of all different sorts, big scale, small scale, touring, building based, opera, dance, whatever. We need to get lots of different shows in to really refine this guidance so it works. Having said which, this is a working document. Lots of theatres are using it now, and so can you. It's ready for use. So don't wait until it's a final version. It's there for you to use now. You can see then on the front page here that the first thing we did, as Andrew and I said, we were never out to reinvent the wheel. There are brilliant organisations working in this field already, and the first thing we did was reach out to them. And so the partners behind the Theatre Green Book project is, we hope, really everybody in UK theatre. The Theatres Trust and ABTT, who set out on the journey and started it off, Salton UK Theatre, ITC, Federation of Scottish Theatres, Crow Cymru, Theatre and Dance Northern Ireland, Community Leisure UK, and then all of the organisations who have already for many years been promoting sustainability in theatre. SIPA, Julie's Bicycle, Creative Carbon Scotland, we're all having constant conversations with them. They're absolutely partners in this project, as are EcoStage, Staging Change, and a lot of the organisations that represent all of you as well. If any of you belongs to an organisation and would like to be a partner in this process, we absolutely would welcome that. So do please get in touch. And at the bottom there, Buro Happold, who provided all of the thinking and the structure behind this work. So the structure of the Theatre Green Book, and when you download it, and in a minute, next time Andrew's talking, I'll put the link in the chat and you can download it. It's completely free, open access. Do please get it down on your computers and start working with it. It's quite a big document. That's because it needs to cover large scale shows as well as small, and we wanted to make sure that we were explaining what's behind it, which is the big principles section here. We're about to put up a sawn off short scale document for those of you who don't have time to wade through a lot of text. And indeed, we've structured this document so that you don't have to. So the bones of what we're saying is just here in the guidance section, which is only 4 pages. And that's because what you all told us in the focus groups that Andrew was describing is make it really clear what we have to do. You know, it's easy to go online and find loads and loads of guidance about sustainability. We all know what it's about. It's about using less stuff, cutting down on energy and so on. But just tell us what we as theatre makers, what I as a designer, what I as a production manager need to do on this show now where I don't have time, I'm stressed, I'm already working 18-hour days. What do I have to do it sustainably? So we've condensed that onto 1 page. And there you can see the 3 steps. We talked about 3 tiers. There they are, baseline, intermediate, advanced. It's all there on 1 page, and then 1 page each for each of those tiers to unpack it. So that's the core of it. And if you've got no other time, just go to that and you'll get it. Before that though, we've got an at a glance section just to explain the basic, okay, where do I start? What is this about? Reuse and recycling, less deliveries, that sort of thing. We'll talk through it in a minute. Then, as I said, there's a long section of principles, and we really wanted that to be in there because some of you will want to say, okay, you know, why does this matter? Why am I focusing on this? And all of the principles behind the Theatre Greenback are in there. And then the final section outlined in green is a toolkit which has really come from all of you. This is theatre makers stepping forward with expertise that you've built up over many years, that we've compiled in one place to try and make it as easy as possible for you to work sustainably. So that's the basic structure, and it starts with the at a glance section.
Absolutely. So if you're able to move on to the next page, Paddy, you'll see a timeline, if you like, of the process that you all go through in creating a show. And this is common through the different sections of at a glance, and our guidance needs to be structured around. We realised needed to be structured around what you do and what your processes are. There are several things in this that, as Paddy's saying, it is the quick. What are the key principles? And ultimately, one of the key things to understand is, and this is part of the changing of the approach and the philosophy, that this the transition and the adoption of circular economy principles and the principles of reuse and using less materials and oh, Paddy, I think it's disappeared off page.
It has. I don't know.
We've got your emails now.
Okay.
But the principle here, it is everybody has a role on this, and you'll see this come out through as we turn more pages, and everybody has a role on this. And the change in philosophy that this is a creative challenge as well. It's not just down to the makers and the suppliers of and those that are purchasing and securing the resources. It is a creative challenge that needs to be considered all the way through the process. Next slide, next page. And this is for all involved, producing and the leadership and the inception of projects, ingraining the strategies that are going to be that are going to be adopted are absolutely key. Next. The making process, the use of materials, and actually what happens after the show, most importantly. How can those materials have a new life in the highest value way possible? Really, really important. And then technical as well. Building on that, everybody has got a part to play. the strategies for the technical delivery of a project really need time to be thought about, and the equipment being used, again, needs time, needs to be thought through. Next. Now, the show process on the previous slides was shown as a linear process, start to finish. What this guide and principles try to establish is the issue of circularity. Circularity in the actions and the process of the show production, ensuring that there is a learning process, an evaluation and a learning process, such that the next show there's an opportunity for incremental improvement, but not only the learning and the people process is circular, but also the material process is circular. So there is that hub in the middle there is sort of showing you, illustrating your materials bank, the stuff of the show, and that is captured, and there is the opportunity for an increasing level of circularity through the show process. That external feedback loop is continually challenging and helping optimize. Yeah, next. So a series of very clear summary objectives or strategies to be that came out of the consultation, and the wider thinking there. I won't read through them, but if you wanted a one-stop, that's what we do. So then, as Paddy illustrated, the principles, there is a significant amount of rigor that has gone behind all of this. There's a giant spreadsheet. As engineers, we love that sort of thing, where we've logged and documented all of the recommendations, all of the knowledge and that we've assimilated from you through the consultation process, and we then help prioritize and triage that into this. You can the beauty of this being an online document, I think you just saw Paddy hovering his mouse over certain parts of this. You can jump between this. So if you do not have the time to wade your way through the detail of the principles section, we can jump straight through to the guidance. But if we're going to do a very quick oversight on the principles, if we keep going through here, Paddy, very much detail on the why that you've already heard from Paddy, the philosophy of this being a pathway, and this being something where we are continually learning, and how this sits into the context of the three other volumes of this of the work that's being done by the ABTT and Theatre Trust. Next page.
It might also be worth pulling out from that page that we do think that although the Theatre Green Book is focused on environmental sustainability, we do think that working in the ways that the Theatre Green Book recommend, the ways that are necessary to achieve sustainable outcomes, they do have a lot of other benefits for people in theatre. It requires more collaboration, more respect for all the people working across the chain of a production. Working more locally enables theatres to connect with their communities better. So we think that there are lots of ways in which sustainable working has other benefits beyond environmental sustainability, which of course connects through to other conversations that are happening in theatre at the moment.
Absolutely. I'll try and pick out a few of those. There are some very good diagrams there, and that principle of investing time in people to facilitate leaner shows. There are, throughout this, you'll see diagrams throughout this chapter. You'll see lots of diagrams trying to illustrate the key principles of hierarchy of materials, and material life cycles. One thing though that I just on this page I do want to pull out is that the lexicon and the language we use around green, sustainability, circular economy is broad and wide, and can have lots of different meanings. If we were to be very, very tight and rigorous on our language in this book, in here, this may become a bit too academic and very hard to get through. So we are using the words of sustainability and green practices as a broad coverall terminology. But if you do want that, there are throughout here good references to other areas where you can understand and explore language and the terminology in greater detail. One other key principle here, and this advocates, is a growing level of familiarity and implementation of measurement. And carbon calculators and material inventories are our first, well, material inventories are our first step in starting to measure what we're consuming, and is a key part of a key first step in being able to then improve and reduce impact.
It might be worth saying that, and we'll take you through a materials inventory later on. It might not be a thing that you're all familiar with. Effectively, it's a quick and dirty carbon calculator. It doesn't deal in carbon itself, but gives you a really good snapshot for where the stuff in your show is coming from and where it's going to go to afterwards, and that's the key thing. And as Andrew says, we sort of think that people over time will all become familiar with carbon calculators. They will become better tuned towards the specific challenges of making shows. But for most, I think we're saying, Andrew, aren't we, that for advanced shows, we expect you to use carbon calculators, but for baseline and intermediate, we think a materials inventory is a much quicker sort of rough and ready version of getting to the same place.
Exactly that, Paddy, and it's something to help you help your thought process through what you're using, but it's also a very useful thing to be looking at retrospectively. You've got a log of what you used in historic plays. You might be able to start seeing trends about where the opportunities for reuse are, but you can also, this does seem like quite often like a daunting field of how am I actually going to improve, but by logging what you use and how you're reducing and putting things back into a circular economy process, you can give yourself a pat on the back for having an impact and making improvements. So a very key part of this. We early on just discussed the creative challenge. So all of those those headings that you heard in the summary section, there is more detail in here, but really focusing, this is a different way of working. Everybody does have a role in responding to the creative challenge. It can provide interesting constraints and opportunities in the way that we produce our work. Throughout this, you'll see that there'll be call-out boxes linking through to later sections in the volume, where we link through directly to toolkits and things that will help the items that are discussed in more detail on these in detail pages.
I think another thing to maybe point out on the creative challenge pages, which were written with a lot of help from creative theatre makers, and a couple of directors and a couple of writers, I think, as well, at various points have said, of course we want to respond to the climate emergency. We all have to do that. But does this mean austerity theatre? Does this mean it's all bare stage plays and stuff? And the answer to that is no, of course it doesn't. It's obvious that to make a bare stage show or a show with only one set is going to be easier than making a complex, visually rich show, a large show sustainably. But it is still possible to make complex shows sustainably, but that's when you really need the collaboration, the collective thinking, the help of everyone in the team, all that expertise of makers and production teams. That's why working sustainably needs to be a collaborative process.
Absolutely, and on that page, Paddy, to facilitate that, time is a very key process. Yeah. Life is hectic, schedules are hectic, and this is often a very challenging thing to find more time. But in that that early stage planning, being able to afford yourself time to think through and plan your acquisition of components that make this show up, it really does help you move. Still not have the bare stage show that you're talking about, but still have a rich, luscious show. But it takes time to acquire and make strategies of how you're going to do that in a low impact way. And actually, straight on to that, this is that diagram across the top there illustrates that perfectly. The more thinking time required at each stage, more time for people, for the team members to collaborate and prepare, more time to find and procure materials. It definitely takes longer. Primarily as a building designer, I look at some of the fondest projects that I've done here, and where I can look at an example of this was when we designed a building for the Forestry Commission, and the design process started. So looking at what were the natural resources in the setting of this, working with the forestry team to see what trees were due to be felled, and what would, therefore, with that material bank we had, what the design would look like. And the outcome of that was a very unique building, still quite complex and visually rich and pleasing, but it took more time to achieve that. Again, referenced in here, all of back to the toolkits. Another key thing in this change of philosophy and approach is spending more on people's time. So it's more time for people to do that thinking, so that there is. And this may be a challenging, particularly in these times as we're reopening, but the spending time on people, bringing that benefit to people, communities, and is highly valuable, but also results in that reduction in carbon of a show.
And we have heard from producers, technical directors who have been making shows more sustainably that know the budget doesn't have to go up. And indeed, post-COVID budgets can't go up, but it's just spending the budget in different ways. And of course, that's something that needs to be built in from the outcome. Can I pick up one other thing, Andrew, on that page that's come up a lot, which is that box bottom left about commissioning multiple shows and seasons. Quite a few people have talked about how in the old rep model, there was a lot of sustainable working because one designer might be doing several shows. You might set up one floor, one technical grid to cover a lot of shows. As one closed, you might take lots of components and repurpose them for the next show. It was a very sustainable model. And it seems far easier to commission a sequence or a season of shows or 2 or 3 shows together sustainably than it is to do one show at a time sustainably. So collaboration between showmakers is a really useful part of this process.
Absolutely. So moving on, section 5 here on the hierarchy and the key principles around materials. That hierarchy going from use of virgin raw materials to materials that have had a previous life and stored and reused in their existing form, and ultimately a key part of this process, and as you become more familiar with working through this, is designing out unnecessary materials at the top of that hierarchy, and then thinking about the following life for those materials. Next page. Again, tools in the toolkit to help with that. Approaches around standardizing, modular design, things which are in many instances common practice, but to be encouraged and to be expanded. That circular life of evaluation and then continued improvement. This is not there will be one fix and then we'll move on. That there is a continuous set of approaches to improvement, and through the way that the Green Book is set up, something that we very much encourage sharing around, lessons learned and sharing between organisations nationally and internationally, and individuals as well. Moving on to props, similar, these are materials, they do have an embodied carbon content, looking at that hierarchy of materials and where they come from. Very important thing here, you know, that feeds back into that planning process, is trying to avoid the last minute ordering, trying to avoid the multiple last minute deliveries. So using time to avoid last minute changes or areas where, or things which were forgotten about. That key point reflects through into costumes, hair and makeup as well. The planning, what happens to materials, and as far as reuse, I am aware of a lot more storage facilities and banks of material of costumes and such like. They are easier to store and to use, but then the future trends of digitization and sharing of inventories of this will allow for greater use of reuse of costumes. Lighting and sound, I think all of these areas, there is more to go. There is more that we are learning about this. There are more people that are sharing thoughts and issues and best practice on these areas. The thinking about when equipment is used, how it gets turned off, looking at standardization and for benefit across multiple shows, as Paddy also mentioned. I've mentioned in part some of the sort of future trends, the modular design, using technology and data to help you with visualizing shows that as you're working through your design process to help reduce those last minute changes that have a greater level of impact on the carbon story of a show. We've talked about the transition and the level of rigor that carbon calculators bring, but within this guidance we have the material inventory as a first step on the path to doing that. But that all leading to this circular economy of materials, and therefore looking at that design for end of use and design for disassembly, so that we don't have to devalue materials and put them in a skip at the end of life. We talked about the scales of people, of organisations that we've consulted with. So we've tried to pull this out and reorder some of this in by scale and by role, and where the quick wins and focus needs to be to help again with the signposting of what's the first bite to take on this journey. And then, as we said, this comes out then in the guidance that organises in an escalating level of rigour and impact, such that we think through down the left-hand column here the stages of the production, the roles within the production. This is for everybody. Everybody has a part to play. Some of the key, Paddy's going to come through and talk about the roles, but I think that and you'll see in the toolkit, but some of the key things and key roles which we're introducing here. So one key thing is the Green Production Agreement, which gets everybody on the same page. Everyone bought into the ambition of the production, and then a key role that this we promote is the sustainability champion, someone that's the agitator, the encourager, not necessarily someone that is a policeman, because having signed up to and having your name on the Green Production Agreement, everybody is bought into this. But the sustainability champion is helping make sure that the roles and the process is working, and helps with that feedback loop, and making sure that we are on a continual learning cycle. I think Paddy, it's probably good to jump for you to go
So
through
jump through to
roles.
talking about the roles. But I think probably as you all look down at this, and Andrew's been talking about it, there are two things I think really important to stress. Most of this, you know, the invitation and making sure that it states the standard the show is aiming for, building a team, but making sure they're appointed early so that you've got all that expertise on board, setting a budget and schedule. They're things you're doing anyway. We've been really intent on not creating a bureaucracy on top of the stressed process of making a show. We've taken what you're doing anyway and just tried to take each step and say, okay, this is what you need to do to make sure you can achieve a sustainable outcome. That's one point. So we don't think there's a lot of bureaucracy or extra work in this. But also the other point is that there is hard requirement at the heart of this. And so, yes, appointing the team early is not onerous. It's not going to take you longer. It's doing something a bit differently. Setting a budget and schedule, once you've got used to setting them for sustainable outcomes, more money on people, less on things, it's not going to take you any longer than it did before. It's not an onerous requirement. But if theatre is going to take a meaningful step towards sustainability, there has to be real meaningful change at the heart of it. And so we're asking that for baseline shows, 50% of all the materials in the show should be coming from reused and recycled sources. We've got to get beyond. Everybody on this show will want, on this Zoom will want to be beyond that past of theatre in which timber products, plywood from virgin forests was being transported across the world and put into shows and then thrown into a skip afterwards. Nobody can possibly think that's sustainable. Nobody, I'm sure, would want to do that. So we have to move towards a circular way of working, built around reuse and recycling. And there is hard requirement in this. 50% for a baseline show. Once you're up to an advanced show, we're expecting 100% of materials either to be reused and recycled or come from an accredited carbon zero source. That's necessary to deal with the scope, the severity of the climate emergency we're facing. Is 50% hard for your first shows? Well, once you take into account steel deck, costumes that come from storage, props that will many cases come from storage or can come from eBay, it's not as hard as all that, perhaps. And certainly the theatre makers who've been involved in the Green Book have endorsed this as, yes, this is maybe going to be tough, but it's achievable. The other really hard piece of requirement we've included is also about reuse and recycling. It's that at the end of the show, 65% of the materials in the show, costumes, props, sets and scenery, technical equipment, should be reused or recycled. Again, not all that hard. You know, technical equipment is always reused and recycled, but it does mean, yes, circular is taking not just a token step, not just a recycled coffee cups and we're not printing out scripts, we're using iPads. That's all great, but it's not a significant step towards sustainability. And this really is. So how do you achieve each of those steps? Well, on the next 3 pages, we've taken each standard at a time, baseline, intermediate, advanced, here's baseline, and said, okay, who needs to do what? Our whole starting point, when Andrew and I started talking about this with Robin and John at the Theatres Trust and others, was sustainability doesn't belong to any one person. It's not down to the production manager. It's not down to the designer. It's everybody needs to work slightly differently to achieve a huge impact. And so we've said, okay, let's take producers, directors and designers, production managers, and the production staff and makers and suppliers and say, okay, I'm one of those. What's my role? What do I have to do to achieve those 17 steps? So for example, referencing the standard as part of the invitation, that's the producer's job. Preparing a green design, a pre-green production agreement, that's so that everybody knows that everybody else is on board with this. They can rely on them to play their part. That's the producer's task. And you'll see here some links, and that takes you to the toolkit, because this doesn't need to be, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's lots of knowledge in the industry and we've brought it together for you all to use. And the same all the way through applies to directors and designers, to production managers, and to everybody else. What if I'm a designer, I can go down this list and know what I need to do to make sure that we hit baseline for this show. And the same on the following pages for intermediate and for advanced shows. So those 4 pages in the end is all you need. We want you to read the principles. We want everybody to understand this. We would love everybody to do climate literacy training to give you more background. But this is the essence of making shows sustainably, culled from lots of expertise among all of you and among the other organisations working on this. At the back then, finally, and then we'll hopefully have a little bit of time for questions and so on, is the toolkit. And this is very much just bringing together resources. We're building it the whole time. Any gaps you see, and we know there are gaps, please help us fill them and just get in touch. So there is a typical green production agreement, which we've put together. Others may come up with a better one. If so, let us know and we'll use that instead. Here's a list of all the things that a venue needs to keep, information on how to work sustainably, which freelancers coming in, it'll make their life much, much easier. Where are the local secondhand stores? Who is the designer on the show before mine, so that I can talk to them about sharing materials and so on. Sustainability champions, Andrew was stressing, it's not the policeman, as he was saying, it's not the person who needs to make the show sustainable, that's all of you. This is just somebody who can encourage and keep the score, as it were. Those are all the carbon calculators we know about for you to start working on. We know there are a couple of others in the pipeline. Climate literacy training, really, really valuable for the whole team progressively to become, get more background knowledge about the crisis that we're facing. Unpacking a bit more budgeting and scheduling. And this is the materials inventory, which is the kind of quick and dirty calculator which Buro Happold have come up with. It's just an Excel spreadsheet, and we're going to get one online that you can download, or it's very easy to create it yourself. So what it's saying is, let's do a workbook for sets and scenery, one for props, one for costumes, and so on. And you just list out all of the elements of the set. The floor decking, floor base, there's a staircase in this imaginary set. And some of them you'll know by weight. If you're buying steel, you've probably got the weight. And if you don't have the weight, never mind, just do it by number. Some wire cables for a suspended structure, there are 8 of them. And then there's a column for where they come from and a column for what happens to them after the show. And of course, for a circular economy, what happens afterwards is just as important as where things come from. And so does this floor decking come from a reused or recycled source? No, it was bought from a builder's merchant. So no, but the floor-based steel deck, yes, that's hard. That comes from a reused or recycled source. And at the bottom, then it's telling you, am I hitting that 50% for this category? And where's it going afterwards? Destination? Well, yeah, that can go to a recycling company. The steel deck goes back to store. The staircase can go into storage. The suspended structure gets thrown out. Couldn't find a use for it. The stones in the set, maybe there were some pebbles or a path or something like that, could be donated to a garden centre. And so it'll tell you, are we hitting that 65% for baseline recycling? Yes, we are. And then there's a separate calculation doing the same thing where you don't have the weight, you've just got the number. We haven't added them together, but you can do that. We're not policing this. You will know whether you're hitting the standard or not. And the same for props and furniture, same for costumes. Same for technical equipment, and with costumes and technical equipment, of course, it's easier to achieve those targets. There are some notes on the meetings. A concept meeting, there need to be meetings that touch base on sustainability throughout the process. The green card meeting, which is something we borrowed from various theatres who are already doing this, is taking the white card meeting and saying, yeah, we're not only going to check in on, is it working creatively? Is it on time? Is it on budget? But is it hitting the baseline or intermediate or advanced standard as well? So this is just talking about how to run those meetings and to have the evaluation meeting so that all that knowledge can feed back into the next show. The quicker we all learn to do this, the quicker we can forget about it because it just becomes part of ordinary practice. Some notes on modelling tools for designers who want to move beyond card models to work. You don't have to, but those who want to experiment, this is how you can start using online and CAD tools. These are all the places we know in the UK which have infrastructure for reuse and recycling. Lots of you will know them. Set Exchange up in Glasgow, Reset up in Set Exchange, who many of you will know. Reset is Glasgow. Green Clover is around London. Modular design. Most sets are made out of welded steel frames in the UK. That's not true everywhere in the world. Plenty of places use scaff type. The film industry mostly uses scaff type framing. It's perfectly possible and it's reusable. Making for disassembly, so you can take the set to pieces more easily to salvage the plywood, the steel for reuse. Sustainable sourcing, if you have gone down the materials hierarchy, and yes, there's a really good justification for making stuff from new materials, there's no other way of doing it, then at least make sure that those materials are sustainably sourced. And it's perfectly possible to give yourself a better chance of knowing that your plywood has come from a relatively local, sustainably managed forest rather than from virgin forests and then shipped around the world. You can do that if you source carefully. Materials not to use: PVC, tropical hardwoods. Nobody should be using those in shows now. Scenic artists gave us these notes about the best sustainable paints to use, where to find biodegradable and reusable tools and products. Ditto prop makers. Some fantastic notes from costume departments about products that are less harmful and their impacts. We would love the whole of the toolkit to be in this level of detail if you can help us achieve that. This from the Association of Lighting Designers about all of their knowledge in working sustainably. We hope the sound designers are on the way with that too. And some notes on outdoor productions and touring productions. I'm going to stop in a minute so that Andrew and I have got some time to take questions, but just on that final page, I hope you can see how many of you and how much of theatre has come together to create this guidance. It really has come from the whole of theatre to be used by all of you. And that's why we're really optimistic that this is the tool that you need to start moving towards sustainability.
Thank you both very much indeed, Andrew and Paddy. And apologies to those of you who might be on schedules. I know that we have run over by a couple of minutes, but for those of you who are able to remain with us, it might be worth just commenting on some questions that we've had in, although the answers are probably things that you've just covered, Paddy, in all of that information that's included within the appendices of Volume 1. But the first question was, would you be able to comment about the use of costumes? We tend to get new costumes for most of the plays because there is only so much we can reuse, and there is still more of it each time. Any general comments about that?
Well, I mean, I think that so on the page Andrew was talking about around initiatives for the future, one thing which is really, really going to help theatre makers reuse and recycle more is as we build up the infrastructure for reuse and recycling. And that applies to sets and scenery, it applies to props, it applies to costumes. And there are initiatives running at the moment. The Manchester Theatres and Mast have got a project running to share storage. Reset in Glasgow is doing that. South Wales has a project underway to look at that. The GLA commissioned us recently to look at something for London. That will make it easier so that you can see what other theatres have in store, and that applies to costumes and to other things. There are second-hand markets for costumes, quite good ones. It's not, I mean, the challenge here is that we know, because you've told us, that if you're working in wardrobe or in costumes, you're often right at the end of the chain. You don't have time to go out and source, or a note has come up from the rehearsal room asking for something completely different at the very last minute. And the only thing there's time to do is to go online and buy fast. That's why more time is needed and why producers need to set things up in a way that allows you time. Because yes, if you go out to eBay, to secondhand shops, or if you can't find something secondhand, to some of the now quite many retail clothes outlets that are making sustainably, then you've got a very, very strong chance of finding stuff from a reused or sustainable source. Always, possibly not. No, there may be something really specific that's needed that you can't find sustainably, and so be it. But certainly, looking at the sector as a whole, there's absolutely a huge chance to move all of the procurement towards a more circular model.
I completely agree with you, Paddy, and I think that just that expansive thinking around end of life is really important. I completely understand that many theatres, many organisations have challenges with storage, and there are initiatives and collaborations that may assist on that, but also just think about other outlets, I guess, for end of life for costumes. It doesn't necessarily, I mean, the preference obviously would be to stay within the within the life cycles of theatre making, but there may well be other opportunities for a new life for a costume or a prop or something that aren't within theatre.
Thank you. Let's move swiftly on to the next one. What is your stance on moving towards LED lighting technology in respect of the fact that many lighting grids are tungsten still, and the balance between continuing use of tungsten lighting fixtures and consuming rarer materials to replace them with LED fixtures? That's the question. And then there's some follow-up. Is there guidance for transitioning to LED or greener light sources?
Quite a technical question there, and I'm not a lighting engineer or electrician but as a start to answer this, I think my answer is around the whole life process here, and looking at the very good point around the virgin materials going into a new lighting fixture. So there is an analysis that can be done on that, and I think there'll be others better placed to do that. But we do have to bear in mind the length of time, or that the lights are used within a show. Certainly within buildings, the transition to LED is absolutely something that is a priority on whole life costing, because of the length of time that building lighting is used. But I think that's something which we do need to provide a greater level of guidance in the toolkits within the guide at the moment.
Perhaps that's something we should seek to engage the manufacturers in helping us with.
I think it's very much, I mean, we're aware that there has been a lot of discussion about this within the industry, and particularly within the lighting designer industry. And lighting designers have been very involved in preparing the Theatre Green Book. I think ultimately, we haven't spoken to anybody who doesn't think that the future belongs to LED, and that LED is now producing stuff which all the designers we've talked with, including many who were very, very cautious about it initially, feel is the case, that we are moving towards LED. Equally, as Andrew says, if you've got a brand new grid designed for more traditional lights, now's not the time to pull them all out. And equally, it's clearly true that LED has its own issues as well. But so in marginal cases, one would have to look at it case by case. But I think the headline is that yes, LED is a huge step forward in reducing energy demand. And though it's not right for everybody to jump forward to it instantly, there was absolute consensus among the lighting design community that we spoke to, and the Association of Lighting Designers, that we're going in the right direction with it.
Thank you. And the last question that's been posted is perhaps one we won't be able to answer, but it certainly bears being aired, which is, would professional theatres be interested in recycling materials via amateur productions? But please comment if you can.
I would say that the process of the circular thinking and the feedback loop and the thinking about materials at end of life, this recommends that type of thinking, and I'd hope that that there would be more local conversations around those opportunities for end of show use of and what happens to sets and materials. So whilst we can't say it's something that should be done, I think that the framework we've set out here should be one that encourages these types of conversations and collaborations.
I think that's exactly right, and it's a really good point. I think that thinking more locally, which has a great benefit in connection with community, will also put you in touch, put theatres in touch with amateur and semi-professional groups. And the other point that was made really forcibly by Simon at Reset, who is working on this a lot, is that you don't only have to recycle within the closed loop of theatre. You know, if you're talking about plywood that's come off a set or whatever, that can go to other uses outside theatre as well. So it's not only that it can go to different parts of theatre, and we need to think very broadly about that, which is great, but also as one starts to talk about costumes, props, raw materials, they may have homes completely away from theatre. But the aim, which is something that Buro Happold have kept educating us in, is that any piece of plywood should have multiple future lives. It might go into a set, it might be reused as part of a set, it might be cut down and modified for a third show, it might go into an amateur show, it might then just be taken as a piece of plywood and turned into a set of shelves. And then right at the end, it might get burnt for biomass, but it will have been through a whole sequence of lives rather than just being single use.
Thank you. And there is another question from Peter McCoy. He asks two questions. I'm going to select his second one because we are over time. And that is devised work, which inevitably involves experimentation with materials that can't be predicted in advance.
That's a really, really interesting question, and takes me straight back to a conversation that we were having with Indu and the Kiln Theatre team, tackling exactly this, because one of the things we say in the Theatre Green Book is that last minute change is very difficult to do sustainably. You know, costumes as an example, you might have to get something in by tomorrow to be there in time for the next rehearsal or for the first preview or whatever. And so the more that you can plan in advance, the easier it is to work sustainably. And I think it was Indu who was saying, and Tom Piper as well as a designer was pitching in on this, he was on the same call, was saying, you know, yes, but there's also, particularly with new writing and with devised work, you learn in the rehearsal process and you can't lose the energy from the rehearsal process by trying to overplan in advance. And of course, that's really important. So I think the answer is do what you can. But yes, if the show demands it, and I can completely see in devised work how that's the case, then it's going to be much harder to do that. And so be it, I think is what I would say. You know, make sure that when you are doing a show which is more predictable, that you're doing all you can to plan in advance. And with devised work, yeah, it's a really good point. The show must still have the creative process that is part of rehearsal preserved.
One thing I would add to this is that we've got to embrace creativity in problem solving here, and so therefore this is not a sort of a guide to gruel and porridge and not being creative in solving these problems, and that's to be encouraged. I think in that creative process, thinking about impact of options, but then one really valuable mitigating opportunity is the logging and communicating features and things that you find from it, so that we don't have to. Yes, we do like to reinvent the wheel in a creative process, but where there are very clear lessons that can be learned, the best amount of dissemination and sharing, so that we don't have to have another high impact experiment that comes to the same conclusion, is really valuable. I'm talking about that from a building designer's perspective. It may be harder in creating sets and staging shows, but thinking about where you've learned something through a creative process and sharing that is very valuable.
Thank you both very much indeed. I hope that's helped to answer some questions and also provide a huge amount of information and detail about Volume 1 of the Theatre Green Book. we have placed links in the chat where you can download it. You'll also find signposts all over the ABTT website, and there is a dedicated website for the book. It is free to download. Let me reiterate that. You don't have to register to use it. There is no audit and commitment. Please get hold of a copy and use what you can, and make the greatest use possible of it. And if you have suggestions, please let us, for inclusion, please let us know. Very quickly then, this was the first of a series of webinars being presented over the rest of today, tomorrow and Friday as part of the ABTT Theatre Show online. Please do look at the programme if you haven't signed up for any of the other events. And we also very much look forward to meeting people in real life, as we now have to say, in September at the co-located Plaza and ABTT Theatre Shows at Olympia. My final comment as a multiple client on capital projects is to say nothing about doing a panel with an architect and a building engineer and overrunning the programme by 25%. With that, I shall say farewell to you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robin.